Hello, I'm John Paw, and I'm here to present a review of some information about craft breweries in the United States and the beers they produce. After reviewing the basic information that we were provided, I'm going to suggest some states that would be ideal candidates for market expansion for new craft breweries. So what did we get? We got some data about craft breweries, a list of them, and also a list of the craft brews that they produce. Many of the beers in this data set were missing values for IBU, the bitterness. 41.7% were missing this value. We were able to impute this value to reduce the numbers of missing values from 41.7 down to 24% by using the Beer Judges Certification Program style guidelines, a listing of the suggested bitterness ratings for different styles of beers. So now looking at the data, starting off to look at the number of breweries per state, Colorado has by far the most number of breweries, followed by California and Michigan, with the least being DC, North Dakota, and South Dakota. If we adjust this by the number of the population of each state to get the per capita numbers, instead we see that Vermont shines, being essentially the Napa Valley of craft breweries, followed by Alaska and Montana, with the bottom states being West Virginia, Tennessee, and New Jersey. Looking at the mean ABV, the alcohol by volume per state, we see that Nevada and DC have the highest number, with Arkansas and Utah at the bottom. Utah, perhaps because of their restrictive rules about the sale of alcohol in stores. The IBU per state, the bitterness, shows that West Virginia and New Mexico have the highest average values, where the least is South Carolina and Wisconsin. So switching and looking at individual beers, the state with the maximum alcoholic beer is the state of Colorado with a 0.128 ABV. This is essentially the range of a wine. This is a Belgian-style quadruple ale. Looking at the most bitter beer, the Astoria Brewing Company in Astoria, Oregon produces a 138 IBU Imperial IPA. We'll come back to this in a minute, the IPAs. Looking now at the distribution of the ABV values, we see that the distribution is right skewed. There's more in the higher range, and there aren't too many that are higher than 0.10. The average is around 0.06. So looking now at the relationship between ABV and IBU, we see that as IBU increases, ABV tends to increase as well. Now, IBU is caused by hops. It's the bitterness that's added to the beer, and ABV is caused by malt and sugar being added to the beer as you brew it. So I believe this is not a causal relationship. One is not caused by the other. It's simply the choice of the brewers in terms of what ingredients they add to the beer. So looking now at ABV versus IBU for Indian Pale Ales versus other ales. So Indian Pale Ales tend to have higher bitterness and also higher alcohol content than other ales, as we can see here, the red Pale Ales. So we also used the K-nearest neighbor algorithm to see if we could distinguish the IPAs versus the other ales. This is an algorithm that identifies a beer based on the beers that are all around it, basically. And this algorithm gives us an 84% accuracy. And you can see at the bottom a map of how the beers were categorized. And you can see that mostly the beers to the left with lower IBU were categorized as other ales, and the ones on the right as IPAs. So then the question for analysis, what is it that makes these states good states for craft breweries? And could we use that information to predict which other states would be good for craft breweries? So looking initially, I looked at the financial characteristics in terms of income and didn't really see anything. But one statistic jumped out is that the state affordability adjustment, an adjustment for the affordability of states, tended to be close to zero for the states that had a high number of breweries. So breweries tend to be in median affordability states. Another interesting characteristic was not financial or economic, but cultural. The number of craft breweries in states correlated nicely with the number of communes in states. Perhaps craft breweries are more a cultural phenomenon than an economic or financial one, or industrial. Another similar characteristic was the number of co-ops per million persons. Again, Vermont had the highest and also the highest number of breweries. Perhaps the values of co-ops in terms of self-help and self-responsibility carry over, and perhaps they're also similar industries and businesses. So perhaps the states that had the highest number of craft breweries are the states with middle affordability and hippie characteristics of having high numbers of communes and co-ops. Maybe we could, taking these characteristics and looking for states that have them but don't have yet a high number of breweries, we find Hawaii, Minnesota, New Mexico, and Washington. Minnesota in particular stands out for having middle cost adjustment, high number of communes, and very high number of co-ops, as does New Mexico with a high number of communes. And Washington State, though it has a high absolute number of breweries, per capita still has a fairly low number and has a very high number of communes. Hawaii is interesting as well, although they have a fairly high cost of living. Any of these states would be interesting states, good states to expand the craft brewery business into. Thank you very much for letting me present this to you.